I'm Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview James DeLeo, Gray & Gray's leading partner. He also co-chairs the firm's merger and acquisition practice group. He has over 25 years of hands-on experience and diverse education background that allows him to serve as a key contributor to clients' day-to-day accounting, tax, and operational needs. His unique combination of professional experience and business, accounting, and tax training allows him to support management in all aspects of running their business. In addition, he works closely with many of the region's most prominent private equity firms, search funds, and mezzanine lenders, and has demonstrated the ability to make introductions for clients in need of access to capital. During my interview with Jim, we talked about his journey being one of the first in his family to graduate college and learning how to be authentic as a leader, to shape culture and encourage people to do the same. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I'm here with James DeLeo from Gray & Gray. He's the leading partner there, and I will hand it off to you, Jim, to just give a little background on yourself before we get started.
Oh, thank you, Amy, and thank you for having me. So again, my name is James DeLeo. I am the leading partner at Gray & Gray. I've been the leading partner for about 3.5 years now. I've been with the firm for 30 years, and I've been in public accounting for 32. So I like to tell people I came with the furniture at the firm, and I'm still here today. So I'm looking forward to this podcast and speaking with you.
Awesome. So where I love to start on these podcasts is just really going back to your beginnings, where you grew up, brothers and sisters, what your parents did, that sort of thing. So just a little background on your beginnings and start of your story.
Sure. So I grew up in Watertown, Massachusetts. I have two sisters, much older than me, and my father was a postman. My mother kind of stayed at home. So very much working class family is where I grew up, and so hard work ethic, very much instilled in me throughout my life. I went to school at Watertown High School, so public school educated. I went to what is now Bentley University, and I got a degree in accounting there. And then subsequent to that, I went to Suffolk University to get a master's in taxation, and then I got my MBA at Babson College. So all of which were, great. It's the best way to put it. The best things I ever did, to be quite frankly.
Yeah. So, okay. So your father was a postman.
Yes.
So what was his family background, and how did he end up in that career?
So my father was a machinist by trade, and
Okay.
And then ended up working at the post office at the end of his his career. So he was a letter carrier. That's what he called himself. And so, my dad was very calm, very even-keeled, quiet guy. I like to tell people, you could never tell if my dad had the best day of his life or the worst day of his life, because he was always the same. Consistent, for sure. My mother, on the other hand, she was the opposite. My mother was your stereotypical Italian mother. So she had no problem telling you what was on her mind.
Which you probably needed. It's always good. Yeah.
For sure.
So how did they meet?
So my parents met, as I understand, they met at a dance that my father did not even want to go to.
Okay.
So he had went with his brother, my uncle, and where both my father and my uncle met their soon-to-be wives. So
Huh.
it's a nice story. It's a story you don't hear very often, but that was the story that was told to me.
So with having a father that's a postman or and a machinist, what were you doing like as far as when you were growing up, what did you think you wanted to be in life?
Well, that's a great question. So for me, I never really, uh, my mother told me early on in high school that, that was about as far as she was going to be able to help me. And the rest was kind of up to me from that point on. My parents did not go to college. And so, anything beyond high school was really, my parents would have loved to help both financially and, in terms of insight, but they weren't able to. It wasn't um, their experience, and so as a result, it was very supportive. That was the environment that I grew up in, but also very much independent.
So was it your dream to go to college beyond high school if that wasn't something you saw, or was your mom or your dad saying to you, you really should go this route?
I'm quite certain both of my parents would have been happy no matter what I did. But for me, it was, as I said, I grew up in a working class family, in a working class neighborhood, in a working class town. And so for me, it was always about, is there something else? And not necessarily something better. Is it just something
Hmm.
else out there? And for me, I can't say that, I wanted to be an accountant my whole life because that would
Right.
be not true. But I did want to be involved in business. I have always found business to be something that has piqued my interest. I find it fascinating, and the more I got exposed to it, the interpersonal relationships in business were not something that I originally thought of when I thought about business. I thought about Wall Street and, fast pace and making money. And then what you realize, I guess, as you get older, is that the biggest part of business, biggest part of life is all the interpersonal relationships with coworkers and balance and all of that.
Hmm. So with that, when you said like as you were getting involved with business or thought you wanted to be in business, did you see a TV show? Was there someone you modeled after? How did you even know this world was out there?
So the way that I knew is when I was a senior in high school, I took part in something that was called Young Entrepreneurs, which was sponsored by, I believe it was IBM at the time.
Okay.
And so basically what you did is
Did
it
someone
was
recommend you for that?
I don't remember. That's a
Yeah.
great question. But I know I did it with a couple of my friends, which made it that
Hmm.
much more interesting. And what we did is we built uh, a quote unquote company. We issued quote unquote stock certificates. I believe I still have the stock certificate.
Oh, funny.
And so, at the end of the day, it was a very high level taste of what it would be like to be an entrepreneur. And so for me, people ask me, "Oh, you're an accountant," and I say, "No, I view myself as a business person, and I would love to be viewed as an entrepreneur because that's where my passion lies for sure." And I think it started at an early age when I had just a brief taste of it, and then getting into school at Bentley, only fostered, that experience.
So how did you know account? So you had this experience of this competition or whatever it was. Um, how did you come to be like you knew you wanted to go in business, but how did you know accounting was the
Well,
right
it's
path?
funny. So for me, accounting has been a bumpy road. This was
Hmm.
not something that, agreed with me right off the bat. And so, I will say for me, I could be called a lot of things, but I think how I would describe myself is super competitive.
Hmm.
And when I was at Bentley, and you learn over time, right? When you go to a school like Bentley, that produces accountants, and they want the best of the best, and they want their folks to be successful. I did not have that experience my first couple of years. I was told that, hey, maybe you should major in something else. And I tell that story to folks because, for me, that put a huge chip firmly on my shoulder that has never left. Because I was told, quite clearly that, maybe accounting isn't for you. And so again, I look at it, and I like to think that I take that experience and I try to impart that, when we have, folks right out of school that maybe aren't on the same fast track as some of their peers. I like to be hopefully the voice of reason to say, hey, you're looking at a guy who maybe wasn't on that fast track either. And if somebody didn't give me a chance, chances are I would not be in public accounting for 32 years, and I certainly wouldn't be the managing partner.
Well, in that, I think it's so important, and this is such a good leadership lesson, because everyone gets busy and then we get frustrated if people aren't keeping up and that sort of thing. But our words matter. And you are lucky to be a person that's competitive and can take that kind of feedback and be like, no, I'm going to show you different, instead of like, there's a lot of people that would be told that and walk away. And we don't realize how harsh, our words can come off, even if we're trying to be helpful or.
Well, especially in such a high-paced environment like public accounting. But I'll bore you with a quick funny story. So the professor that told me, at Bentley, that when you're at your sophomore year and you're at that make or break point where you're either going to major in accounting or going to transfer to another major, that same professor that had told me, hey, maybe this isn't for you. Many, many years later, I was back on campus doing just increasing the firm's visibility on campus. And I happened to have a meeting, not a meeting, but just a brief encounter with that same professor, who did not remember me, but I certainly remembered that person.
Right.
And so it's just funny how things happen, because at one point in time, that was a person that was doing their job saying, hey, maybe you might want to consider something else. I believe what they said to me was, I would rather be the best at what I do than just average. Oof. And so many, many years later, on that brief encounter, that person, had heard that I'm the managing partner and had a very different view. And it's just funny how perception, same person, much older for sure, but same person. And it's interesting how perception.
And they don't know who remembers them, so it's so funny, because I have a similar story that going into public accounting, I had a manager that just on site didn't like me and would try to make my life miserable any possible way they could. And I being an assistant, when you walk in, you just have no control over, and you don't know what's right or wrong. And they were leaving the firm, after busy season. So I went to their going away party to, okay, fine. And they were part of my hiring. I was like, I'll do the nice thing. They took me out of the room at their party and said, successful women don't look like you. And personally, that person might have been thinking they were helping, but, and they walk away from that conversation, but those things stick. And it was about, probably, I don't know, 10 years later, I had won this award. I was a partner in a firm and won an award for up and comer. And I didn't know you'd have to make a speech. And I was the first one to go up. And I was so shocked, I won the award, and they're like, say something. And I was like, so-and-so said, successful women don't look like me. It was the first thing that came out of my mouth.
Well, it is funny you say that, because, I had a similar experience when I first started out. I was told that I am the same person in the office and outside of the office. And in order to be successful, you can't be that way.
Oh
And
man.
so, again,
Yeah.
you take my background, right? I didn't know any better. It
Right.
was a
You
working
don't know
class
better.
background. And
Yeah.
so I was just who I am. And whether
Uh-huh.
we were at lunch or whether we were sitting in a conference room or whether it was after hours, after work, I was the same person. And very quickly, more than one person told me that if you want to be successful, you have to be one person in the office and whoever you really are outside of the office. And I got to be honest with you, I have always been me, and that's part of the chip that's on my shoulder, which is
Mhm.
always one of, I think I can be me and still be quote unquote successful.
Right. Well, and the thing is, you're never like when I went through that process, uh, she was basically kind of putting down my looks. And so I had gone and changed my makeup. I changed all this stuff because I thought, from her, that was what I was getting the perception of. And for a few months, I stuck with this and I felt miserable. Like it wasn't even the work. I was just so miserable every day not being me.
Mhm.
And like you said, and then I was just like, screw it. If, if they're not gonna like me, like I'm doing such a good job and running really complicated jobs that no one wants to do. And then it was a couple years later, I was, in a discussion with another manager and it came up and he's like, no, that person was just a jerk. Like no one said that about you. Like, but for years you think that's what people are thinking. And so overcoming that is really important. So how, like when you're saying I believed I could be me, why did you believe that?
Well, I mean, for me, it's the other piece of it is being happy too. You mentioned
Right.
it. And so did I know that I could be myself and have my personality at all hours of the day? Did I know that? No.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, I was always searching for the place where I could be that would accept me for who I am and judge me for the job that I do. And thankfully, Gray and Gray has been that place for a long, long time. And it
Hmm.
started with, it's a family first environment, and that certainly, was the initial attraction for me,
Hmm.
because I had worked at places before that were all about, did you get the work done, and could have cared less about who Jim DeLeo really was.
Right.
And so we try to be, and I say try because nobody is perfect at it.
Right.
We
And everybody has a
always,
different expectation of what
for
that means.
sure.
Yeah.
But we pride ourselves at the firm of being that place where you walk by somebody in the hallway. I mean, we have 120 people in the firm. And so we're big enough where, we have some critical mass, but we're not so big that you can't walk by somebody in the hallway and know their name. And if you don't, you certainly should stop and say, gee, I'm sorry, but I don't know you. And why is that? And,
Hmm.
and so I like to believe we're comfortable doing that, which makes it a special place to work, especially when you're working, nights and weekends and busy season. There are so many things that we can't change in public accounting. So we
Right.
try to focus on the so many things that we can change.
So maybe you can get into some more detail on that, like just under the covers of Family First. What does that mean as far as your culture and how are you actually implementing, things in your culture to protect that? Because you can say those things a lot of times, but if it's not monitored, and so forth, that can go off the rails, or a new person comes in and doesn't, says they believe in it, but goes in their own way of culture from before, it doesn't work. So how do you actually implement it and protect it?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, for
Hmm.
sure. But, for us, culture has become, has always been critical and our primary focus. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that we have as a firm is the people.
Right.
At the end of the day, that is what makes up our firm and many others. So, we're constantly monitoring culture. And how do
Mhm.
we do that? We do, multiple town hall meetings with, the COO, myself, and a small group of people. So it isn't a large group. We're not asking people to get up in front of 120 people and say, hey, here's something I really don't like at Gray, Gray, and Gray. We're asking
Hmm.
them, amongst their peers of half a dozen folks to have a conversation. And then what we do is we take the primary themes, and I'll give you an example.
Okay.
So two primary themes out of our last town hall meeting. So we do hundreds of employee benefit plan audits. And at one point in time, one of our auditors raised their hand and said, I am working on employee benefit plan audit after employee benefit plan audit after employee benefit plan audit. And what I notice is everybody's employer match is higher than ours. And I'm just curious as to why that is. And the candid answer to that person was, I have no idea. And we looked, and sure enough, we were below market. And so, again, it was addressed appropriately by the person. They didn't say, hey,
Hmm.
everybody else on the planet's getting a bigger match. And by the same token, we were equally as upfront about the fact that, myself as the managing partner, I wasn't even aware that, and my point to the whole firm was, this affects everybody.
Right.
This is partners, this is employees. And
Right.
so this is something that needed to be addressed and was addressed.
Right.
And then I'll give you another example of something that was very positive. In one of these meetings, somebody had mentioned the fact that we do summer Fridays. We've done summer Fridays for many years now. And it's been a big part of our culture, which is on Friday, it isn't just Amy's going to have Friday off or every other Friday off. It's Amy and her entire department. So you can actually take the day off
Right.
and not have your manager or the partner in your department calling you or emailing you or what have you. And what this person had mentioned was that this was one of the primary drivers why they came to the firm, where it was just something different than that they were used to. But what they really, really enjoy is the fact that, through COVID, through ups and downs, we've never, quote unquote, threatened to take it away,
Hmm.
because it's a big part of who we are.
Right.
And there was a time where we were the only ones doing it. That time has since passed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so now, a couple of folks have said, gee, that was a really cutting edge idea. We'd like you to come up with more of them. And, I really wish we could on a daily basis, but those are easier said than done. But those are two nice stories, because one was literally something that was so obvious that we just didn't see. And if we're not
Hmm.
talking to our people and they don't feel comfortable bringing those things up,
Right.
we would have never known that. And the perception would have been that we just didn't care.
Right.
And then the other piece is when you do have ideas where you're spending time trying to be a little bit different, and it's so hard to be different,
Hmm.
but when you can, for at least a moment in time, be different and do something that nobody else is doing that people really appreciate, it makes you want to do that much more.
Yeah. So what about on the reverse side? Because a lot of times when you would talk about transparent leadership and being authentic, people can surface things that you can't change. So how do you address those things so people still feel heard, but they understand why?
Yeah. And so what we'll typically try to do is be very, very upfront. So, for example, we'll accumulate in these town hall meetings the themes, but then the one-offs we'll address individually with that person. So that person knows that, hey, their question, their concern, their issue has been heard, but
Hmm.
it's not something that we can address firm-wide, and try to
Right.
give them some level of detail into that, because at the end of the day, right, wrong, or otherwise, our motto is we're always 100% transparent. We tell our firm we are in business to make money, and we're not going to apologize to anyone for that.
Right.
And so at the end of the day, we're not greedy, we're not solely driven by money, but it is certainly one of the reasons why we're
That's
in
why you have a job.
business.
Yeah. And can
That's
have Fridays
exactly
off.
right. Exactly right. And so we spend a great deal of time trying to articulate that, in that we love to have fun. We, pre-COVID, people, will tell you about, the amount of weight that they've gained during COVID. I would argue that every single person at Gray, Gray, and Gray has lost weight because of COVID, because we had so much food in our kitchen, morning, noon, and night, 12 months a year, 7 days a week. And so at the end of the day, between the birthday parties that we hold every month, between the food that we have, between the outings that we try to do as team building events, I would argue that we try to live that whole culture. It's one thing to say it and nobody believes you when you say it. We all know that. You have to live it. All your partners have to live it, because it permeates from the top down. And I think, for us, we are doing a good job in that. We're not perfect, for sure. We have work to do like everybody else, but we're doing a good job with that. The partners have got to the place where we can go to a partner meeting and we can voice our opinions. And if we're in the dissenting view, we can, again, voice our concerns and walk out of that room and speak the party line, so that the partners look like they're unified, which we are, and make sure that the staff know that. Because at the end of the day, that's leadership, right? Leadership is, I might not agree with it, but I support it.
Right. And not gossip around it. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So through COVID, there were a lot of things thrown at firms like yours that you've never experienced before. And definitely people have worked more than ever. What were some things that you were doing during that time to make pivots and changes, and how did you evaluate it when it was coming at such a rapid pace and not knowing what the future looked like?
So the first thing that we were concerned about was taking our work remote. And the reality was, in accounting, we all knew we could work remote. We just didn't want to. Right. So when COVID first hit, our major concern was, is everyone going to be able to work from home?
Right.
Are they going to be able to dial in? Are they going to be able to do their work? Are they going to have a good functioning laptop? And to be quite honest, in hindsight, that wasn't something we should have been worried about at all, because we had all of that. One thing we've done very well is we invest in technology. We have a world-class IT department, and that was seamless. But the one thing we started to realize very, very quickly that we needed to address was, we had people working at home alone. We had people working alone with multiple roommates. We had people working at home with little children running around the house. And so each one of those dynamics were different and posed their own individual challenges. So what we quickly pivoted towards was, we did things like everyone else. I mean, I've heard these, virtual happy hours. We certainly did those, and they have a shelf life, right? They're good for 2 or 3 times, and then everyone's looking at one another saying, maybe this isn't a good use of our time. Right? So we pivoted and we did what we call the Good News Challenge. Day in and day out at the beginning of the pandemic, you could turn on the news and all you would hear is bad news.
I know.
So we did our own, we called it the Good News Challenge, which morphed into pictures of newborn children and new pets, and it was fun. And again, it had a shelf life for sure, but it was fun. It was nice to see how people were connecting with their families during the pandemic, and it was nice for them to share it with the firm. So again, some of the other things we did, our in-house recruiter is also a personal trainer. So we had Rita's workouts at noontime every day. And those were, good for the mind, the body, and the soul. And again, this is, Rita has a passion for this, and it comes through in all of her workouts. And that was very, very well received. We did some virtual gatherings where we had a virtual game show firm-wide, where we put people on teams, and we did that just as a way of kind of connecting,
Right.
and we had kind of snacks sent to everyone's home, and things like that. So again, we were trying, and I'm sure we're not the only ones thinking of these things, but we were trying to find ways to maintain what we feel was a world-class culture before COVID hit, and we were trying to maintain that through COVID. And, and part of that was, interns and new hires,
Mm-hmm.
those poor folks, the good news for our internship program in 2020 was that we kept it, right?
Yeah.
We did not cancel our internship program. The bad news, as I told all our interns when on their last day, was I apologized to every single one of them, saying that I apologize that you missed the best part of the firm, which is the people. And
Right.
while you can get a little bit of that virtually, it doesn't tell the whole
Right.
story about Gray, Gray, and Gray. So, for me, I'm a people person. I am not the best accountant on the planet, but I do think I have certain skills that I bring to the table. One of which is able to communicate, and so that was our focus, and it continues to be our focus as we try to migrate back to some sort of normal.
Mm-hmm. So what does that migration look like now that you're in this stage?
So again, we've been very transparent with our workforce that we were not going to force people back to the office. We never did that. We also were not going to tell people when they needed to work in the office and when they needed to work at home.
Mm-hmm.
So, we took a view which was, at the end of the day, your hybrid schedule depends on, in some weeks, it'll depend on the department you're in and the deadlines that they're under. In other weeks, it might depend on the level that you're at in the firm. It may depend on what you're currently working on. So what we told folks is your hybrid schedule is going to constantly evolve. And it's going
Mm-hmm.
to evolve with your workload, with your teammates. And so you should not be concerned how the person sitting next to you, how their schedule is unfolding,
Right.
because their schedule has nothing to do with your schedule.
Yeah.
And, is that the right approach? Is it the wrong approach? Candidly, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel comfortable telling folks that Gray, Gray, and Gray, Jim DeLeo are certainly not going to tell you where you're most efficient and where you're most productive.
Yeah.
That is going to evolve based on how your work week kind of evolves.
Yeah. Totally makes sense. So another point you've kind of brought up a couple times is your strength as an entrepreneurship. Maybe, you're good accountant, but the entrepreneurship side of your personality is it's what, you really know as your strength. So maybe talk about how you've gained confidence in that and how that's helped you in your career, because I think everyone, thinks they should be the same type of accountant to be successful, and that, like you, I started as an auditor, and I remember looking at the managers and partners going, there's no way I'll know every reg like they do, or that's just not the way my brain works, but I can solve puzzles. So, so that, trying to figure out where your path is and not compare yourself to the person next to you.
Well, I mean, as my story is, I learned early on that I probably wasn't going to be that person that's reciting code sections or
Yes.
FASBs. And so, again, trying to find my place, the question for me was always one of, you have to be technically competent. You have to know what you're doing. We all know that. But the question is, do I have to be the smartest person in the room to be successful? Because I'll speak for myself. I always thought that I did. I always thought that I had to be the one doing all the talking, and I had to be the one that knew the most in the room. And then again, as you get experience, and which is code for getting older, you realize that the last thing that you need to be is the smartest person in the room. If you're actually doing your job, you're not the smartest person in the
Mm-hmm.
room, and you don't have to do all the talking. But it takes quite a while to realize that, and it's okay for the person sitting next to you to have a better idea, or have an idea that you wouldn't have thought of.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it's a team approach, and you all look good. Somebody's good idea makes Gray, Gray, and Gray look terrific.
Right. So is there any moment that you can think about where you got that aha moment that I don't have to be the smartest person in the room and you were successful, or something that was kind of that trigger point of like, no, this is my superpower and I'm going to be fine in this profession.
Well, and I think there was no aha moment for me, but it's the way that I look at it is you take little bits and pieces from all of the
Hmm.
people that you have worked with throughout the course of your career, the good and the bad.
Right.
Right? I can remember working on jobs where I would look at how the manager or how the partner were handling a particular situation, and I would say, wow, I never want to handle it like that.
Right.
And just to myself.
Right.
At the end of the day, you take those little bits and pieces with you and they mold you into who you are. And for me, I always gravitated to those folks that were the great communicators, the ones that could be telling me something so mundane and I would find it so interesting because just the way they presented it, just the
Right.
way that whether it was their passion for it, whether it was their interest in it, whether it was their love of the particular topic, whatever it was, it just held my interest. And I will say, I mean, let's face it, most people look at accounting as being boring, right? And
Right.
that we're these super mathematicians, which I have never been in my life.
Yes.
And so I look at it and I say, well, if somebody can make it sound really cool, then I want to be that person.
Right. Yeah.
And so for me, that's how I've always approached. I'm the first one to tell my clients, hey, you know what? There are, you're not doing business with me for sure because I am the best accountant on the planet, but I do think I'm a really good business person, and I certainly know where to find the right answers. I might not
Right.
know them off the top of my head, but I know where I can get them.
And getting
And
comfortable saying that is an important skill.
it is a skill for sure,
Yes.
because I certainly wasn't doing that when I was 25, 30, even 35 years old. I was not telling clients that, hey, you could probably find a smarter accountant than Jim DeLeo. I certainly was not doing that. But at the end of the day, what you realize, it's all about personal relationships. And so if you have the right relationship with the client's completely fine with you making that statement because they know who you really are.
Right.
And so, for me, that's where there was a time in my career where I thought I could solve everybody's problems.
Yeah.
And then you realize, and for me, it took me a long time, that you can't. You can
Hmm.
solve people's problems that are aligned with the way that you think. And for those that aren't, you need to show them to somebody who thinks like they do. And that might not be you, and you might not have that person in your firm, and that's okay.
Right. Yeah. So was it always your goal to become managing partner?
I think so. So the answer is that is kind of ebbed and flowed.
Okay.
I would go to partner meetings and I would say to, in certain occasions, boy, I want to be the managing partner someday. And then I would go to other partner meetings and I would say, not for all the money in the world would I want
Yeah.
to be the managing partner. But, if I'm being honest, I think part of, again, my competitiveness, I was told as a 20-year-old that maybe this isn't for you. And so there is definitely part of me that says, okay, well, in my own head, maybe the top of the profession in public accounting is to be the managing partner and to have others believe that you can take the reins and lead the firm. And so part of me, says that, hey, I want to be the managing partner because in my own mind, I want to validate the fact that that was a little premature to tell me at 20 that maybe accounting wasn't, or business or what have you, wasn't meant for me. So there's
Right.
certainly part of that. The other part of it, as I was member of Vistage for a period of time, and my Vistage coach said, "What's the best thing that you like about being the managing partner?" And I said, I love strategizing and being that thought leader. And what they said to me was, that's great. That's 10% of the job. What do you think about the other 90% that
Yeah,
has to do with
exactly.
all the people that are looking for guidance and leadership? And that was, also a sobering moment because that's really what you realize after you've been doing this for long enough, is that that is really where the focus has to be. All the other stuff, yeah, it's cool, it's fun, it's terrific to see a deal come together, and it's impactful. But it's even more impactful to see, a group of new hires come through the firm and love their job, and have four other roommates that are also working in public accounting, and not seeing the same level of enthusiasm because maybe they're not treated the same way, and maybe they don't have the same values.
So what has been your biggest stretch learning? Like, how have you overcome it?
Well, the biggest stretch is always to get out of your comfort zone, right?
Hmm.
And it's easier said than done. But for me, there are certain things I take from both my parents. I mentioned my father was always very reserved, and you could never tell if he was having a great day or a bad day. I have that quality, and my mother was always very, very, you know, her personality was one. She had passion in everything that she did, and you really had to know who she was to understand, because if you didn't know my mother, you might have thought that maybe she's yelling. and
Yeah.
uh and that, you realized, I did really quickly, that there was yelling and then there was passion because of
Right.
something that she really believed strongly in. And I have that same quality as well. I have been accused in meetings for yelling, and I would always have to take a moment and say, well, wait a minute, I'm sorry that that's how I'm occurring for you, but for me, that's not yelling, that's passion. I love what we're
Yeah.
talking about, and I want to make sure that I'm speaking clearly. And so I do, every once in a while, I have to remind myself that I can come off to others as yelling when I'm just trying to be passionate about the subject matter.
Hmm.
So
Uh,
those are interesting things for me. Those
yeah.
are challenges, because those are out of my comfort zone, because they just come natural to me.
Right. And sometimes we don't know how we're perceived. A lot of times I do sessions on personal brand, and that's one of those things. It's like we keep coming up against things until we actually listen to what people are saying. It's like, oh, well, that wasn't the energy I was intending to put out. So I've got to monitor that, because that's not how I wanted someone to feel when they walked away. But you never know what yelling triggers in somebody that has a background of people yelling at them. And you don't know what someone's dealing with walking in a room.
Well, and it's funny too, because, and not until very recently have I gotten, kind of coaching.
Hmm.
And it is funny, because there would have been times in coaching sessions where I would have said, gee, I don't, this meeting kind of went sideways. And here's what I said. And, my coach would come back and say, well, this is what I heard. And I was like, yeah, that's what everybody else heard. But that's not what I was trying to say. What the heck was, what happened in the message? What happened between this great idea in my head, and it
Right.
just did not get communicated properly? And so every once in a while, it is helpful to have somebody say that to you, because it's not
Mhm.
an easy thing to hear when somebody says,
No.
wow, that just came out awful.
Yeah. Having
And
that
you're
third
thinking,
party that
wow,
doesn't have skin in the game, it's that they can just say
it's
how it
hugely
is.
helpful,
Yeah.
yet hard to hear,
Yeah.
right? I
And
mean,
action,
well, yes,
so you
at
have to
the
be open to um, I hadn't, I've been a speaker most of my career, but until like 3 years ago, I decided I'm going to go to an intensive speaker training, because I've never actually gone to speaker training. And in that speaker training is just all different professions, right? Like I'm used to the accounting profession, but there are a lot of athletes. And there was an athlete, that what they would do is have this like master speaking session, and the speaker coach would be up there, and then just you'd start talking, they keep stopping you, change this, do that, whatever. But he was showing with one of the athletes, like when he was coaching her, the way she was intensely listening to the coaching. And he turned to everybody else and he said, this is why I like to coach athletes, because athletes don't take it personally. They know if they get coached, they're 1% closer to winning. So they don't ever take it personally versus like us in professional roles that we're constantly being evaluated. And will we get the next promotion? Like we take any coaching personally instead of like, will it make us 1% better? And will it, like it's our natural defensive mechanism. I just thought that was really interesting because it was such a difference to watch her get coached.
Yeah, well, and it's nice too to have that, um, support system in place where
Yeah.
people can feel that level of comfort as they're getting coached, right? And so,
Yes.
I was talking to one of our newer hires, and they went to a big university, and so on. And quite frankly, she could have went to work anywhere. And her comment to me was, I came to Gray, Gray, and Gray because I really felt that people would, it was more than just a cliche, that people would know who I am, and I would have a voice, and I wouldn't be just a number walking down the hallway. And, I like to think that we have the culture that makes people feel comfortable that way, that, if you're taking coaching on a job, it's not personal. It's all about making that person better and helping them succeed, and so forth. So my hope is that we're creating a support system where people can feel vulnerable without feeling stressed as they
They're
go
going to
home.
lose
Like,
their job because of
exactly,
it. Yeah. Which is
exactly.
so, sometimes so much of an issue in accounting is like, you'll be in the, you know, meetings where they're talking about promotions and like 3 years ago, this person did this. It's like, oh my God, let's let that go.
Well, and you try to create an environment where, there'll be some times where I'll just say, in a meeting, gee, I'm not sure. I'm not, and maybe I'm sure, maybe I think I know, but it is nice. It was nice for me to hear partners say, I'm really not sure how to handle it. And what you realize as you gain more experience and you get older is that
Right.
the person that has all the answers really doesn't have any of the
No.
answers.
Right. It's
And
true.
that's what we realize as we gain more experience. So you really appreciate that person that on occasion will say, wow, I really have no idea how to handle this. I've never really dealt with this. What do you folks think?
Yeah.
And that's how we learn, right? You become a
Yeah.
situation where you say, wow, this person is okay telling us that they really they don't have the answer. They can't recite the FASB off the top of their head. And that's okay.
Yeah. We're not Google.
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
means we're human, right?
Right. Exactly. Well, awesome. So I love to close with just some rapid fire questions. So you pick a category. It's either family and friends, money, spiritual, or health.
Family and friends always.
Okay. Things or actions I don't have that I want with my family and friends.
Oh, for me, you can never spend enough time. I think of all the regrets that I have as opposed to all the things that I've done.
Mhm.
It's a character flaw, but for me, it's
Yes.
always about spending more time, and not more, but quality time.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Things or actions that I do have that I do want.
The actions that I've always had, and I think it served me well today, which was, you always have to have those outside interests, and you have to be. I'm the first one, and I was able to do it better when I was younger. I could work through all hours of the day and night, and I was proud of that at one time. And now I realize that that is nothing to be proud of. Every once in a while, you've got to step away, and you've got to, whatever that is, you've got to engage with your family and friends. You've got to, go work out. You've got to get away from what you're doing because it makes you better. And so I have been able to do that more recently in my career than early on, and that's something that I never want to lose,
Yeah.
because that I was the type of person, I would crank away, and sometimes it just wasn't productive, and it was burning. It would burn you out more than it would be helpful. So
Right.
I will take that with me, hopefully.
Yeah. All right. Things or actions that I don't have that I don't want.
I would say I am not presumptuous, and I don't want to become presumptuous, because again, in business, in life, in a fast-paced environment like public accounting, first impressions, they certainly matter, but they're not everything. And
Yeah.
so I very rarely judge a client, a colleague, or a situation based on the first impression. And I know lots of people that do, and they've been very wrong in the assessment that they've made. And in some cases, the firm has benefited from that. So
Yeah,
that's a quality I don't want because it's easy to acquire.
exactly. All right, last question. Things or actions that I do have that I don't want as far as family friends.
So I'm the most impatient person on the planet, right? And so, I'm the guy that looks at everything and says, "Yeah, we can get that done in 2 days, right?" And that's really a 2-month project. And so that is a quality. For me, everything seems like it should be easier than it really is. And the reality of is nothing is easy. Everything takes work, and that is a quality, a virtue that I am still trying to learn.
Well, and that's like I'm similar. Like, when you're more the visionary person, you need the detail person as you're right next to you. To be like, well, that's not possible because we have to do this, and oh, okay. So,
That's exactly. We all need, I have Hank Wolfson,
your
who's our
opposite.
COO. He is
Yeah.
the person that says, "Hey, we're not being realistic here." Or actually, what he says is, "You're not being realistic here. The rest of us are
Yeah.
very realistic."
Exactly. So your stories have been so helpful. Is there anything that we haven't discussed or something that you want to conclude with, as part of your story or your message?
I mean, for me, the story is, I think for me, the journey has been one of we all need to learn who we are. We can't be our friends. Sometimes we can't be the people that we admire in our firms, but we can be the best version of ourselves. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's a lesson that does not come overnight. And we need to be able to accept rejection.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a lot of that. I've had my share. There are a number of occasions in my career. So, you know, 33 years in public accounting, there are at least a dozen times where I could have said, "This is it. I'm
Yeah.
done," and or not even gotten into it to begin with.
Right.
And so the message that I have to folks is we all have our own trajectory. We all have our own skill set. We need to find out what our trajectory and our skill set is, and then we need to find the place that's going to help grow and foster that. And that place does exist. And, some of us have to go through multiple iterations before we find it, but that place does exist for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. There's so many great lessons for people. I appreciate you being on today.
And I appreciate you having me. Thanks for the time.
And now for my mindful moments with my interview with Jim. I thought his background was really important to understanding who he has become as a leader in his accounting firm, but also in how he supports the people around him. And it really began with his family and parents and their focus on being happy no matter what, that work wasn't necessarily the first focus, but they were hard workers, but very supportive of him and what he wanted to do with his life. But being one of the first in a family that gets a college degree, he didn't really have the examples in his parents of moving on through education and in business. And so really looked to the outside of finding mentors and learned how to really build interpersonal relationships very early on. And what he found, even as a young person in high school, when he became part of this young entrepreneurs group, was really how important it was to develop these relationships in order to create the success that you want in life. That it's very hard to go it alone, but it's also even harder to try to be different or what you perceive as success and really come off as authentic to people. And I think really when he got down to it and his background of really working hard to get what he wanted, that was a very entrepreneurial background. And when we go into accounting firms, a lot of times that entrepreneurial mindset isn't necessarily a part of why someone picks accounting. And it's important to really figure out who we are so that we don't try to compare ourselves to others. It was really interesting when he gave the examples of a professor telling him that he wouldn't make it in accounting and trying to find ways that he could be accepted. But because of the hard work he had done in the past and his confidence in himself, he used relationships and really made sure to move himself forward in different ways. And I think this example is so important because a lot of times we think there's only one way to be successful or one way to become partner. But actually, his entrepreneurial mindset is really what has helped him in becoming a leader. Thinking a little bit differently, knowing what he is good at and what he's not good at, and making sure that he emphasizes the things that he's good at in order to achieve success, but also in working organizationally. And so we talked a lot about, even during COVID, how he needed to unify the staff and make sure that they were still happy as things kept changing. And it wasn't the way that people were used to in their everyday life. And when you take work remote, how you still guard the culture and coming up with creative ways to be able to create that happiness and camaraderie is really important, even when we're virtual. So although some things worked in the beginning when virtual was newer to everybody, what we talked about was making sure that there's a constant review of what makes people happy and not. And I think a lot of times in leadership, we find things that work and then we stick with them versus actually assessing, are those things still working? And now, as offices are being moved, or people are being moved back to work in offices, how you actually assess what makes people happy is by over communication and actually going around listening to people and making sure that you listen to the issues that people are having, not necessarily just from a leadership perspective, but at all levels of the organization, so that people are heard, and as a leader, you're addressing the issues that are most important to everybody. This is also really important that you know as a leader that you can't solve everyone's problems. And as long as you're addressing it and being transparent of why decisions are being made, then you still have that authentic feel to your leadership, that you're not acting as if, only certain levels of people can know certain things, that you are respecting people's lives and the human side of them by over communicating, but also saying why certain things aren't happening. So I think what's really important is understanding where these strengths come from. And when we talked about it, it was really understanding, his own deep understanding of himself, that he really took two things from his parents. One, his father being more reserved and calm, and his mom being passionate, and how he could meld those two features together in an authentic way for himself, but also as a leader, because being aware when he gets too passionate about things and how he can tap into an example of calmness like his father is really important. So when we can look to people around us to find the skills that maybe we lack or that we want to achieve, it's important that we understand what that looks like in somebody else, so that we know what we're trying to get to. If we just say that we want to be calm or passionate, it's important to understand where we see those examples and what we like and what we don't like. And so we really ended with him really talking about how important it is to create boundaries between work and life, and making sure that you have outside interests and engaging with your family, that there's always going to be work. There's always going to be plenty of work to be done. So that it's important that we allow for those boundaries so that we can create the energy that we want for ourselves and be better for the people around us, whether that's our clients or our team. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.